Test, test, test. Yeah, I got it. Guys, this gentleman back here, his name is Dula, and Dula is going to begin with us as an intern pretty soon. Dula is an environmental scientist from Yale, and he's going to serve kind of as an ecology intern. So, as we study through this and go through the next process of seasoning of discerning, what does it look like to reimagine our view of the land and our relationship with plants and animals? He's going to be there to help us along, and he's got some good ideas of doing workshops for the community on helping grow a healthy tree or things like that. And he's also a member of the Ethiopian congregation that meets here. So his Sundays are going to be mighty long. Oh, that's very kind. All right. So we are going to begin here. Let me get my thing here. It's 11:49. I'm really going to try to move. You have to understand with this particular section is a large, comes these three theology of, meaning the study of God as God relates to land, animals, and plants, are kind of a big central part of my research, meaning I have a lot of content because I'm writing a 125-page paper right on the topic. And so it's me trying to really cut down a lot. So I'm really cutting this down, and I think I can move through it pretty quickly. But sometimes, I have sermons where I write it and I'm like, everything's so good, but this would be an hour long. So I have to just chop and chop, or I split it into different ones. But so this one, I'm really being a little ambitious trying to fit all of this here. So what I'm hoping is I'll give you a good overview of the different ideas, questions, give you a sense of where we're coming from. But as time goes on, these are topics we'll revisit as we look at moving from this group. If there's a group that forms from this, where we want to be people who say, together we can create a team of people here at FBC who want to focus on our, being the Ecotheology team or whatever. These are ideas we can start throwing around. So this will not cover every question or topic on the idea here. So I ask that you be gracious with me in recognizing that there'll be not everything that could be said will be able to be said. So some of this might feel a little lacking, but we'll see. Okay. All right. How is everyone? We good? We're here. So in your hand you have your Ecotheology Session Seminar 3 outline, as well as your scriptures. So you can see it. And they're separated into 3 categories: land, animals, and plants. Animals have the most. And so I just wanted to print those for you, just because I'm going to be referring to a number of scriptures, and rather than me just reading them and you listening, you can have them in front of you to read, look over, take home if you like. So I want to start with a review, which you have that in front of you, just where we've been. This is session 3. So session 1 was a religious history of the region, and I really narrowed that down to 2 things I want to focus on, which was the indigenous folks here honored the earth and its inhabitants as an expression of their religious belief. Likewise, the Puritan colonizers exploited the earth and its inhabitants as an expression of their religious beliefs. I understand these are simplified statements, but the point there is both of these groups had religious beliefs, or you may say spiritualities, that informed the way they related to the earth. And the question is, wow, the ones who represented quote-unquote Christianity here don't look like they were doing the best job. So the question we have in our mind, well, were they really representing a Christian view of the earth or land, or was it a total detour from Christian ecology? Session 2, which was last week, the present spiritual context of Brantford. And what we learned about the spiritual but not religious group, the SBNR, which is a population, a growing population in this region, also around the globe. This population does not align with a specific religion, but finds spirituality through earth-based practices and experiences. Now, again, that's a summary. We spoke about a lot more than that, but the point I want us to pull away from last week is that there's a growing group of people who are spiritual, but quote-unquote not religious, meaning they are not atheists. They're people who don't necessarily want to align or feel like they fit in with a church tradition, but they very much do believe in spirituality, things like that, and many are finding spiritual fulfillment in earth-based practices. So as a reminder, we have the definition of ecotheology. That's what this is about. It's the study of the relationship between God, humanity, and nature. Ecology is the study of life form intersecting with their environment. Theology is a study of God. So ecotheology is a study of God, humanity, and nature. What does God want us to do on this planet as it relates to the earth? So the question we're left with then is this simply. We looked at the religious history of the region, which not great when it comes to relationships to the earth. We looked at the spiritual but not religious group who says, I'm not really interested in the church. I'm interested in some nature spirituality. Doesn't seem like the church does any of that. Maybe there is their idea. So the question we have is, well, how does God intend us to relate to land, animals, and plants? Ecology is broader than that, but for my purposes, my research, I'm just simplifying ecology, ecotheology into land, plants, and animals. Unfortunately, I'm not diving into water and things like that. So, all right, we see these mistakes, we see this growing population. What does the Bible say about our relationship to land, plant, and animal life? So we are going to jump in, and I'm going to make sure I'm following along with what I give you, because I have 8 pages right here, and you have 1. No. I always have that. Okay, so first, theology of the land. Theology of the land. So the first few pages of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, tell the story that's held dear by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And it's this picture of God creating humans, God creating animals, and God creating plants to live in harmony in the garden, right? Close to the earth, close to God. But often missed in this reading is that humankind, mankind, which is the word Adam or Adam, okay? Adam means mankind or humankind, is not only made for the earth. Adam is not just made as someone who serves the earth, but is made from the earth. And the word for earth is Adama. So Adam is human. The word Adam means human or mankind. And the word earth is Adama. All right, these words are very, very linked. So let's look at forgetting the call. Forgetting the call. And I'm going to read Genesis 2:7. You can follow along. It's the only scripture I have for land here. The Lord God formed the man from the soil of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So Adam, humankind, is made from Adama, which is earth. Okay? Likewise, humus, if you're gardening, you know the word humus, is a Latin word that means earth or ground. That's where we get the word human from. Do you see this? The word for people comes from the word dirt, soil, earth. And so in the biblical story, in the imagination of the Old Testament authors, the land, the earth, the dirt contain the ingredients needed to make a human person. God made earth. Well, and you want something to walk the earth, well, just take some of that earth, you mold it into a human. So you have in Genesis the Creator shaping and molding soil into a person. And how does this person come alive? He breathes his ruach, right? That's his spirit, his breath, into the nostrils of this soil person. And he gives this person life, and he commissions him to work the land from which he emerged. Okay? That's the image there. Are you staying with me? God creates dirt. God makes dirt person. God breathes, gives them spirit, gives them life, and now they're responsible for the ground they came from. So that's the Old Testament. That's that creation story image. So with such a land-based foundation, you would think the church would possess a really robust theology of land, and you think Christians would all have a deep connection to the earth. However, Western Christian theology is often devoid of a really healthy human-land relationship described in the creation story. And not only has the church really lacked a good connection, but the land has often been stolen and abused in the name of, or even with the approval of, Christendom. Now, among these reasons is capitalism. And I'm not trying to be a big socialist here. I know we need to start talking about capitalism. But capitalism does have a role in the way it formed the Western church in mind. In the words of Michael Parenti, he said this: the essence of capitalism is to turn nature into a commodity and commodity into capital. So he says from the capitalist mindset, you look at nature as how much money is this worth? How can I make a buck off this, right? And capitalism is rooted in land enclosure, because enclosure, quote, enclosure led to the creation of large estates owned by a small elite, and this spurred the movement of the agrarian capitalist enterprise. So just from a neutral perspective, judgment or non, what happened is land is valuable. How can I make money? Well, I can get a lot of land and I can use it to grow a lot, and I can sell the plants and all of that kind of stuff. That's how our farming world became what it is compared to what used to be. Just people had their own subsistence farms. So in Western society, seeing the world through the lens of enclosure and capitalism is natural. Most of us don't. When I point out the idea of like private property lines and the idea of seeing nature for money and how you can get money off this, most of us don't even imagine that there is an alternative to that. However, enclosing the land for profit without concern for the land's quality, without concern for the neighbors, that's a modern phenomenon. Humans didn't live like that previously. That's forgetting the call, now remembering the call. So the idea is the church has kind of forgotten the call of being grounded in the earth. So what about remembering the call? Reimagining the Christian faith in our current society does not mean inventing some new faith that somehow fits where we are in society. Instead, we simply need to rediscover the roots of our faith and look for ways to apply it to society. In other words, we don't need to say, oh, look what's going on in the world. How can we change Christianity? No, we need to go back to what our original assignment was and say, how can we apply what our original calling was to society in a creative way? And nothing, again, is more straightforward and foundational than the Genesis story. The Garden of Eden was a lush space lovingly created by God. God planted a garden for the benefit of all life forms, and humanity was entrusted with the care of this space, which means humanity was called to garden, to nurture, to care for plant life and every other living being that thrives alongside them. And if you've ever gardened, you know gardening requires careful attention. It requires tending and cultivation. And if the fragile ecosystem of a garden is mistreated or neglected, the garden will suffer and maybe even collapse. And if you are paying attention sometimes to the ecosystems around a garden, you can know what happens at a garden, good or bad, whether you have invasive animals or this or that. affects everything that's living alongside of it, right? A garden, one plant isn't in isolation to this plant, isn't nice, but everything is connected. What the rabbit does, right? What the spotted lanternfly does, what the tree of heaven, that's an invasive tree. Whatever these things do affect everything else. And if you have a really good, man, the bees are happy if they're pollinating off your tomato plants, all these different things. So these things are all interconnected. So a garden, unlike any other environment, speaks to the codependency of all its inhabitants. So that's remembering the call. We're first and foremost gardeners in a broad sense. We're cultivators of earth. We're stewards of what's around, what we've been born from. So what does it mean to follow the call, following the call? For the Western church to reclaim a Christian view of the land, it must reimagine what it looks like to engage with the land outside of enclosure, outside of capitalism. And we have to see ourselves as actually working against society's ethos that is self-serving, often at the expense of earth and neighbor. We don't see necessarily ourselves the way we relate to land, buy property, support land, do things like this, how it can be a self-serving act that only helps certain people, and that the earth and neighbors can suffer based on how the land is used. So instead, the church must act with radical humility, hospitality, and sacrifice, placing the needs of land and neighbor over our own interests. And if Christians see themselves primarily as gardeners and stewards and cultivators of the earth, they would quickly learn that they are restricted from the destructive and exploitive practices of our predecessors. Meaning, if we take this role seriously, that we're first and foremost gardeners, we would notice that a lot of practices that have been done and are being done on the earth don't align with what it really means to be someone born from God. And I have a little reflection of this. Last year, I'll read it. Last year, Leah and I were in Providence, Rhode Island for a getaway. Walking around town, we were exploring the city, and we turned a corner and found ourselves in the middle of an urban vegetable garden with a sign that read, "Welcome to the Garden of Earthly Delights. All are welcome here to eat, tend, and rest. Help yourself. Take what you need. Leave the rest for others." Now, after eating some jalapenos and cucumbers, we continued on our original route, quickly realizing that the garden was on the grounds of the First Baptist Church in America, which is we're same denomination as us, but they're not just the First Baptist Church in Brantford, they're the First Baptist Church in America. And so it's okay. Trash bags are important. And so we're in the backyard of this church. This wasn't a little garden. This was, a perimeter. You walk through the whole area, and it's just, raised beds, and it's just full of beautiful signs. I took some pictures. And this garden was a modest yet powerful picture of a congregation recognizing their original call to the land, repurposing it as a garden, and providing food and refreshment for their neighbors. And they call it, the Garden of Earthly Delights. So the idea of here's a little slice of Eden with what we have. And they even invite you to tend. It's like, come shovel and prune if you want to help this. Or, but come be part of this garden we're doing. I feel like this is making my ears sag. I gotta, let me just fix this. I just gotta put my glasses on top of this. Okay. So that's theology of land. So you didn't miss much. So we ended with, that was First Baptist Church in America. Yeah. Really cool. And I was saying before, it wasn't just a little thing here. It was a whole courtyard, and the whole perimeter of it were raised beds just full of stuff. And it was awesome. It really was crazy. It was. All right, so that's theology of the land. Next, theology of animals. Because this has been my bigger area of research, this is a lot more content. I'm really trying to strip it down, though, but there'll be a good amount of scripture. I won't spend too much time on it. So, theology of animals. Let's first look at the Bible and Genesis 1, 20 through 30. This is a long one, so just sit back and read along if you like. Then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." So God, am I still there? Okay. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurried and swarms in the water and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fifth day. It's okay. Then God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals." And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw it was good. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along on the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds of the sky, and the animals that scurry along the ground." Then God said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth, and all the fruit trees for your food. And I have given every green plant as food for all wild animals, the birds in the sky, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life." And that is what happened. So the creation story in Genesis describes the original relationship between humans and animals. Among other things, we're just zeroing at humans and animals. And to understand what's going on in this passage, I just want to look at three key concepts. First of these is called dominion, or I have the word govern in that translation. Humans are made in God's image, and that doesn't mean we look like God necessarily. To be made in someone's image in the ancient world meant you were their representative, meaning you're a model or a statue of that king or deity on earth. So God said, "You're my image," meaning you're my reflections on earth. You do my work on the land as I am not on the land in the same way. So being God's image means we are created as God's representatives to work on behalf of God on the earth. Now, this passage has been used to justify exploitation, where it says God gave them dominion to govern the earth, and some people have said that means humans are on top and everything else is theirs to use for pleasure, fun. You can just ravage the land for your own benefit. It's not a very good interpretation. Instead, this passage is an assignment. Remember, the context is a garden, to steward and cultivate their home, and all life forms are interconnected. Food. Yes?
Do you know what the original word is? Because I have never seen govern used. It's always been dominion, and of course there is a difference. I mean, dominion means that you
Yeah.
rule over it, and govern, you could be
Yeah.
a democracy like we have.
Yeah, I'd have to look. Yeah,
But
it.
I think it does the original translate more to dominion or
I'd have to.
govern?
I'd have to look at it. Yeah, there's manage is another one, but dominion is the most common traditional translation. Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yep. So the second thing is food. It's interesting if you read this. What is the first food for humans and animals? Every green thing, right? So in this original state, humans and animals are eating fruits and vegetables, not flesh. Because in this original state, there's no death. So nothing's dying, right? And so there's no death even for food. Then there's the third thing is companionship. We have to ask, all right, if the original function in the garden, animals aren't food, animals aren't being used to work, animals aren't skins, what are they for? And what you basically come down to, their original thing, they weren't a commodity, they weren't a resource, they were just living alongside us. They were neighbors, they were worshiping companions. There were other creatures that we were given stewardship over who were meant to live in their own way God created them to live. So then what happens? You have the fall. The fall. Shortly after God set this arrangement in motion, humanity reached outside their appointed role. This is the story of the fruit from the tree that Adam and Eve eat, and the consequences are severe, marking this event commonly known as the fall of humanity. And there was relational violence, right? There was this big cut between humanity and God. And this violence bled over into our relationship with the rest of creation. And it was first signified by God used animal skins to cover Adam and Eve's newly shamed bodies before they're exiled from the garden. So let's look at Genesis 3:21. It's in your at the very bottom. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and Eve and his wife and clothed them. So something really interesting happens here. For the first time, animal blood was spilled to accommodate human sin. Right? So when humans sin, they realize they're naked. They cover themselves with fig leaves. It's an interesting story. God sends them out of the garden, but he kills an animal to take the skins for them to wear as clothes. Something now shifted, right? An innocent party went from neighbor and companion to sacrifice and clothing. Now they had this new role. And from this moment onward, animals became food, laborers, sacrificial offerings, clothing, and various other sources used now for human survival and pleasure, all of which were just signs of tremendous suffering in the world. I mean, after the fall, there's a lot of breakdown we see, right? And if we want to come full circle, then you have God coming down eventually as what? The slaughtered Lamb of God, right? And but there's this kind of early image is that human sin results in bloodshed of animals, right? And you see throughout the Old Testament that happens. But let's look at the law. So as we move from the fall, now you have Israel, kind of this rogue group, and God then gives them the law. And once outside the garden, God's always has this desire that, like, I want things to be the way they were at the garden. And God makes provisions to ensure that some remnants of Eden were safeguarded for human, animal, and plant life. Next, you turn over your page, Deuteronomy 5:12-14. So this is in the Ten Commandments, where part of it, this is a longer version, where he gives long instructions about the Sabbath. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. So in the same way God made provisions for humans and animals in the Garden of Eden, there was a balanced, healthy life for everyone. Even on the other side of that, he continued to give a piece of that Eden life during the weekly Sabbath, where every other nation, they don't take a day off from their garden, from their work. He says, you do. And guess what? So does your cat. Or so does your donkey. When you're working, they're working too. Give the donkey a break, And so everyone has to take the Sabbath, right? So humans and animals receive this rest from God. Then we have the prophets. In the Old Testament, you have these prophets who are always looking ahead at, like, God's giving them visions of what God is going to do. Sometimes not so good, sometimes really good. But at cursory look at the prophets give us a beautiful glimpse of God's vision for human-animal relationships that can be tasted now, but will fully be restored in the future. You look with me at Isaiah 11. Yes. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand in the viper's nest. They will neither harm or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So over and over again, the Old Testament had these pictures of one day when the Creator returns, everything's going to be back to the way it should be. And among other things, this is just one example, you have these really, and there's other ones that say a lion will eat straw like an ox, right? The wolf and the lamb will lay down together. But I like reptiles. So this one was one of my most interesting. The kids will put their hands in an adder's den, which is like, the kids are going to go play with a rattlesnake, and they'll be fine. So it's just this God giving this image of like, among other things, our relationship with animals is something that will be restored to its proper place. So that's the Old Testament. Let's look at the New Testament. The role of animals in Jesus' teaching cannot be overstated. Of note is the role of animals as humanity's teachers. Jesus often appeals to animals as ones from which we can learn. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus confronts the issue we all know of human anxiety, stressing about tomorrow. And Jesus tells his listeners to learn from the example of birds because they demonstrate this ideal, non-anxious dependence on the Father. He said, you're stressing about tomorrow, you're stressing about this. It's a human problem. But pay attention to the birds. Look, they're not stressing at all, so they can teach you how to relate to the Father in the best way. Have a good day, Peter. Okay, go have a seat. All right, go have a seat. Perhaps, but we're on a tight timeline here. Okay, we have another church coming in about 40 minutes, so we got to keep moving. So we probably won't have time for that this week. Oh. Okay. Okay. So let's look at Matthew 6:26. Consider the birds of the sky. They don't sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth more than they? So if you're struggling with anxiety, look to the birds, and they will help teach you. So that's the Bible. Let's look at church history. Church history. And I'm going to appeal again to the Celtic tradition because that's just been a big part of my research. The Celtic Christian tradition presents a beautiful picture of animal-human relationships. In his book, The Celtic Way of Evangelism, theologian George Hunter explains that while St. Francis, you know him maybe, he's the animal guy, right? I got one in my garden, right? It's just something you do. His relationship with animals was absolutely remarkable and unique in the Roman Catholic world. He wasn't like anyone else. However, such relationships were commonplace in Celtic Christianity. So much so that, quote, every Celtic saint was noted for his or her great fondness of and rapport with animals and birds. Basically, all the Celtic saints were like St. Francis. He was an exception in Rome. It was the norm in Wales and Iona and all those places. Here's some examples. The story of St. Patrick and the deer is one of many such stories. Columba's Iona served as a sanctuary for migratory birds and a hospital for injured birds. His legend tells of a favored horse shedding tears as Columba lay dying. 2 otters befriended Cuthbert as he prayed while standing in the sea. Columbanus had squirrels, wolves, and other wild animals among his friends. The tradition around St. Kevin of Glenlow tells that a badger brought him a daily salmon to eat. The birds surrounded him in song as he prayed, and that he once experienced a blackbird laying an egg in his hand as he opened it to pray. Michael Mitten suggests that the very strong presence of the Spirit of God in such people affected the animal's response to them. And there's just so much of that in this Celtic Christianity. Obviously, some of this is legendary, but it all comes from the place that, like, there was this assumption, if you're a godly woman or man, the animals just, they're just all over you, and you have a special relationship. So that was this assumption. And the Celtic imagination assumed that closeness to God meant closeness to creatures. And accordingly, one of the most renowned Celtic voices, Pelagius, insists that animals are worthy of neighborly love. He says, when Jesus commands us to love our neighbors, he does not mean only our human neighbors. He means all the animals and birds and insects and plants among whom we live. And Celtic Christians not only saw animals as sacred, but they also lived with them according to this conviction. So my reflection. Throughout church history, the use of animals has mostly been seen as allowable. I mean, it's in the Bible, right? Now, there's always been pockets of believers who didn't eat meat or had certain practices, but typically, animals are seen as something you could kill to eat, for work, for fur, skin, all of these things. The question we're faced with right now, though, is this. The use of animals in the United States tends to be drastically different from historical contexts, because now we not only have a deeper understanding of animal intelligence and emotions, we also have things like factory farming and destructive fishing practices, both of which are unthinkably cruel and have massive environmental impacts. There's all kinds of other forms of exploitation. So the question we have to get curious about is simply, are these forms of animal use that are quite different from historic and global forms of animal use, are they compatible with how God intends for us to relate to animals? It's not something we're going to answer today, but that's a valid question to be asking. There is it's funny, my brother-in-law is a hunter, right? And they hunt white-tailed deer in New Jersey. And let me tell you, white-tailed deer are a problem. Everyone in my family has hit a deer. It could have almost died in a car accident. Whenever they kill a deer, they always send a picture of it with my niece or nephew holding up his head with his big doofy tongue hanging out. You know how they look when they die. And sometimes I think they say, oh, you're probably... because I don't hunt, you're probably sensitive to this. And I say, no. I think this is actually the most ethical and respectful way you could eat, especially if you choose to eat animals. That's not only is thinning population, the same way we prune plants, you need to prune populations. The deer population is massive, it's destructive, but also this animal lived a life in nature. It was killed humanely and quickly, and it's every inch of it's going to be used, processed, eaten by the family. So I like to think when it comes to use of animals, the methods that you can manage to actually look at are probably the more ethical ones, where we're so removed from even... By the time I get this thing wrapped in plastic, is this even an animal? Was it an animal? So those are just, I don't want to get into that too much right now. This is something I could talk about another time. But this is just not me saying do this or that. It's just another reflection. What does God's original goal and ultimate goal look for us as we want to, we do have permission to use animals, utilize animals. But that also comes to play. At what point are we abusing, exploiting, and torturing animals? Okay. Wow, we're already at Theology of Plants, guys. You're doing great. We can do this. All right. Now, this is my least developed section. I'm actually still working on this part of my paper. So, but I think it's still okay. The biblical story begins and ends with trees. And the text in between contains imagery of wheat, flowers, vines, thistles, cedar, and seeds. the flora in the Bible are sources of supernatural knowledge, ultimate healing, cursed toil, delicious satisfaction, and teaching on anxiety. The ancient reader who lived close to the earth, who was sustained and sheltered by plant life, had an acute sensitivity to the specific references to plants in the Bible. In other words, the Bible is full of plant imagery, and it meant a lot more to them than us because they understand they were closer to plants, right? However, the modern Western reader often inhabits a very different world. We live in a different place than this original group, and where we live, most berries can be bought in a plastic container, right? And trees, perhaps more so than animals, are scarcely viewed as much more than objects you can exploit and use. They're just a tool. Oh, there's a tree. We can do this with it. It's great to make this out of, which it is. Hey, you can build it this. But not usually seen much more deeply than that. And that's where we're kind of missing the world of the first Christians and the original people who read the Bible. And so many Christians may be surprised to learn that the purpose and potential of plant life exists beyond a utilitarian vision. In other words, there's a lot more to plants than just what we can use them for, although they're great for food and building things. But that's not all they are. And global and biblical Christianity and historical Christianity offer a rich and beautiful legacy of human-plant relationships, which should inform the imagination of people like us who really want to ask, what does God want us to do with the land, the plants, and the animals? So first, let's look at the Bible. Before creating humans and animals, God births plant life from the earth. Yes, before humans and animals comes plants. And that's Genesis 1:11-13. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. You notice how plants are kind of described like animals and humans? Be fruitful and multiply. And they, it's like, oh, you will have babies according to their kind. It's like, oh, they're just creatures who it's like, oh, you two are you're gonna have babies and grow. And it's like they're kind of given this, oh, you have plants, you have animals, you have humans, different, but all kind of alive and doing these things. Again, ancient world would have been way more in tune with that, as well as a lot of people around the world, even presently. Now, here's something we don't think. In Exodus, well, so we know God takes the form sometimes of, we see the Holy Spirit descend like a dove in the New Testament, right? God takes the form of a plant, too, something we don't think about too much, maybe. In Exodus 3:1-4. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why this bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. One writer who I love, but he's pretty out there, Mark Wallace, he said, speaking to Moses in a commanding voice on the holy mountain, God in Exodus is an on-fire, earth-rooted vegetation deity. So God over and over incarnates God's self to just meet people. God is God, but God's able to take on different forms. And in this setting, God becomes a plant. God becomes a bush. Elsewhere, plants are seen, kind of like animals in their own unique way, if we didn't look at too much, as worshipers who do have a relationship with God, one that we cannot see. But this idea is when the Creator returns, their aliveness, which we can maybe sense sometimes with a tree or animal, will be revealed more fully when the Creator returns. Isaiah 55:12. You shall go out with joy, be led out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall clap their hands and break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. So there's this very Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, if you like, Ents. You know, you have these living trees where it's like there's something a little more than we're seeing. Part of it might be our fault, part of it might be society, but part of it is the fall where, as one theologian said, everything is just a shadow of what it would be in the presence of the Creator. Everything's kind of cold. Everything's kind of, if you're in Narnia, everything's kind of in winter. And, but when the Creator returns and Christ comes back, there'll be everything that's in the shadow, the sunlight will shine on, and it'll be able to burst into what it truly is. So there's just these images of the ancient writers of the text looking forward to a day. Yeah, go ahead. You're good, buddy. We're almost done, really. When everything will kind of be what it's meant to be. Then beyond that, in the same way he's talked about animals, Jesus is constantly speaking of and interacting with plant life in the same way he does with animals. I mean, it's so much there. Again, because he was an agrarian culture, they lived among plants and animals, but there's so much to learn from Jesus' plant life. But I just want to point out, in the same way animals can be teachers, so too are plants teachers. This is our last one. Luke 12, 27, 28. Look at the lilies and how they grow. They don't work or make clothing, yet Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for flowers that are here today and thrown in the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith? So not only... So first of all, Solomon is this wonderfully dressed royalty, and he was just iconic for how rich Solomon was. And he said, Psh, Solomon isn't even close to how my father dressed these flowers. They were way better. And God cares for them so well. Look at them. So why are you? And they're not even then. They're going to be in the fire tomorrow. I think they're plowing that field tomorrow. And they're not even stressed because the Father loves them. How much more valuable are you? So there's this appeal from Jesus a lot to just say, like, calm down. Remember who you are, whose you are, and look at the other inhabitants that you share this earth with. You're made in God's image. They're not. Nevertheless, man, they are just being cared for. And even if you're not sure how they're being cared for, they don't seem too worried about it. Right. Basil was an ancient Christian teacher. Oh, I have one more, actually. From the beginning, we see plants playing a significant role. We have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, by which humanity fell. We have the cross, referred to a tree on which God died, but in it we found redemption. And in Revelation, we have a tree on the new earth from which leaves sprout for the healing of the nations. Right, so you have trees all over the place. And Basil said this, there is not one plant without worth, not one without value. So let me just jump into church history one more time, then I'll be done. I'm going to be in the Celtic world again. Just as the Celtic worldview sees God animating the land and animals, so too is plant life seen as a source of divine light and life. The vibrancy of the divine is perceived through careful attention to astonishing colors and textures of trees, resulting in language such as, quote, smooth the tresses of the yew, placed delicious with great green oak woods, trees of apples, huge and magic. To be taken aback by the sight of trees is a consistent theme in Celtic faith. Like you just have this thing where people just seeing a tree and being knocked on their behinds from it. Wow, like look at that. Like, you know, it's just like they were just so astonished by it. And you see this up through the writings of John Muir. John Muir is by many considered to be even a Celtic Christian teacher. We can debate that, but at least the people I read think that. Either way, someone said, Muir now began to see a sacredness shining at the heart of all things. As he later described the glory of a sunset on the mountaintop in California, yellow gold, the last of day, not gilding but golding to flame to the tops of the trees, spiritual fire burning in every tree, in every bush, in every stone. Every bush is a burning bush. So the idea when he was just look at the sunset and see the trees, He's like, I see burning bushes everywhere. I see God just illuminating all of this. Saint Bridget, who's also called Mary of the Gale, is a Celtic Christian saint whose connection with nature is magnified by the stories surrounding her relationship with oak trees, which was a sacred plant in pre-Christian Celtic world. Back when they were quote-unquote pagans, the oak tree was a very sacred plant. And guess what? When they became Christians, oak tree was still important. Yeah, it was this ancient respect for the oak tree. And according to legend, when Bridget was a child, she fell asleep next to an oak tree. When she awoke, she found her cloak hanging on the branches, transformed into a beautiful display of blossoms. This event was seen as a divine sign of her future sanctity and connection to nature. And later, an oak sapling was planted on the grounds of what is now the Brigidine Convent in Tullow to make the link between Bridget's monastic foundation at Kildare and the newly found order of Saint Bridget. So basically, you had this woman who, the story goes, when she was little, she slept next to an oak tree, and it hung up her coat and all these things, and she was connected to nature, and she became a nun, started a convent, and they planted oak saplings there, because in the Celtic tradition, various plants and trees, often species revered in pre-Christian Celtic religion, are incorporated into Celtic symbolism. Now, moving forward, one of the most renowned European Christian mystics is Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. I probably quoted him today. I quote Brother Lawrence all the time. Who, despite being a simple cook at a monastery, amazed those around him with the steadfast presence with God, which profoundly affected every area of his life. He's a guy whose whole life is practicing the presence of God, and it's one of my favorite people in history. And The Practice of the Presence of God is a book containing his letters and maxims, which is a window into the contemplative Christian life for all who seek it. In his writing at the beginning of his book, he shares his conversion story, how he, in his word, went from being a heathen to this person whose whole life is given to God forever and ever. And the details of his story can be overlooked. I've probably listened to the audiobook of this like 150 times because I would do it just to fall asleep. It was in my nap books. It's an hour. It's on YouTube, and I just love it. I love it. And honestly, not till like a few months ago did this strike me. This is the beginning of his conversion. In the winter, seeing a tree stripped of its leaves and considering that within a little time the leaves would be renewed, and after that the flowers and fruit appear, he received a high view of the providence and power of God, which has never since been effaced from his soul. That this view had perfectly set him loose from the world and kindled in him such a love for God that he could not tell whether it had increased in about 40 years since he had lived. So he has this conversion experience where he just has this high view of God, this love for God that just never goes away. But what I missed when I first read it is this: the event which catalyzed Lawrence's life with God was an encounter with a tree. He's just out there going for a walk, and in the winter seeing a tree stripped of its leaves, boom, he has this. So this person who's one of the most, biggest influences of Christian spirituality, at the very beginning of the only writing we have of them, is saying that they became who they were because of the way they encountered a tree one day. It wasn't anything else than that. No one was reading the Bible to him. No one was doing anything. It's just a tree. He was hit, and everything changed from there. Now, centuries later, scholar and spiritual teacher Belden Lane. Now, I put him as church history, even though he's still alive, because he's pretty old. No, I'm kidding. But he's been around for a long time. He tells, and he's this Christian scholar, Belden Lane. If you want to read more about this, just read anything by this guy. He's just an incredible earth-based spiritual teacher, but he's a Christian too, and all these things. He writes often of the relationship he has with a tree, Grandfather Cottonwood. And he's very comfortable with himself, Belden Lane, because he just tells stories like this. I spend more time with Grandfather than I do with most of my friends. He lives in the park across the street from my house. Every evening I go over to him, leaning into his hollow, entering into a practice of contemplative prayer. I let go of thoughts and words, releasing what's rummaging around inside of me that day. At times, something unexpected arises. Is it from the inside of me or him? I never know for sure. It may be a feeling of being unaccountably loved in the moment, feeling utterly at home in the hollow of a tree. So my final reflection is just something I wrote on gardening, a reflection on gardening. Then we're done. Plant life offers sweet scents, spicy flavors, and a kaleidoscope of colors, all of which reveal the divine flow pulsing through the roots and branches. However, plants offer more than food and scenery for human enjoyment, but also invite cultivation for their survival and ours. A mutual interplay of hands, roots, rocks, and water, an activity that forms humanity cognitively, effectively, and behaviorally. Humanity's first assignment, according to the Genesis account, is gardening, caring for the flora that decorated Eden. The act of gardening roots humanity in its divine assignment to lovingly prune, water, disinfect, and fertilize the silent beings that provide us with oxygen, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Modern Western society has evolved to the point where people can separate themselves from intimacy with the earth. Hence, the goal of practical ecotheology is to embed oneself in the web of life, encompassing both land and species. Gardening provides a gateway to an earthed formation because it requires unrushed attunement to the drama happening inches from the earth. When people get their hands dirty, cultivate the land for food, prune the branches from shrubs, and protect the tree from invasive insects, they are putting work into their relationship, proving their faith through action. In the words of Choctaw elder and Episcopal priest Stephen Charleston, we stand not at the top of the food chain, but at the center of the circle of life. Now is our time to give back life, to restore life, to free the spirits of all creatures, past and present, to breathe once more the clean air of freedom. It is for this purpose that we were made, and for this moment that we were given the power to change. So my final question, which isn't answered today, but this is where it leaves us. How can we reimagine our relationship to God and our spiritual, not religious neighbors in light of biblical ecotheology? So we started with the historical region of good and bad relationships to the earth. We have this group of people who aren't really interested in church but like the earth. And now maybe we have a little more informed understanding of the value of relating to earth, to the animals, to the land, to plants, as God's maybe more active there than we think. So how does that reality then, maybe we should pay more attention to animals, plants, and land? Well, not only is that an invitation for us to get closer to God, but it seems like there's some common ground there between us and our neighbors who might not think they're interested in church. So that's where it's going to leave us. Next week, we are off, and I misspoke, so go to the historic road show, right? And even, which works out even better, I misspoke when I talked to Jeff. I thought I was doing that weekend. Or we are having the food during the service. So 11:30, by 11, you can be hitting the road. So do that next week if you like. And then on the 26th, we will be back here. I'm just going to talk for a little bit on God's land, God's goals. Just give some vision, just some ideas. I already started with some of it today. And then we're just going to take a walk around our land for 20, 30 minutes and say, Yes.
I also want to extend an invitation to the museum in Guilford.
Yes,
the John
please.
Muir Museum. It's dedicated to the Quinnipiac, who stewarded this entire region from North Haven over to New Haven. And I think it dovetails on what AJ
Absolutely.
was speaking
Absolutely.
to us about for the last 3 sessions. it's self-explanatory, it's really quick, and, I think it'll maybe tie some things together.
Where is
The
it?
Donland Museum, it's in North Guilford, it's the Dudley Farm Museum,
Oh, the
on
Dudley
the
Farm.
corner of 80 and 77.
Maybe we could even do a church field
I
trip.
would love to do that.
We should do it.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause
Let's do a church field trip. I've been there. It's super fun.
Yeah, I'll talk to Maria, because I can arrange the whole.
Yeah, let's just do it on a Saturday or Sunday after church.
Yeah, okay.
The one thing that came up in my mind is the Isaiah under the broom tree, and then his relationship with that tree, and the relationship of the tree with him through God,
Yeah.
which I'm gonna go home and read and
Yeah.
maybe into that more, but the relationship between plant and God and human is
Yeah.
right there.
It's all over the place. So feel free if you're interested, study more. If you say, I want some books on this, there's so much out there. I'm not someone who was even familiar with Celtic spirituality. I grew up in a region, a lot of my friends were Irish folks, and they would have a Celtic knot or a Celtic cross, and I thought it was just an Irish Christian thing. I didn't know a whole lot about it, but my teacher, who's a Taiwanese woman, as I've been going by research the last few years, she's like, listen, you have to do Celtic stuff. Like the Celtic Christians have this a very unique approach to earth and land and things like that. So if you want any resources, anything like that, just send me an email, let me know. So the next time we meet for this, the 26th, we're just going to I'm going to give you some final thoughts. Then we kind of say, just walk around, enjoy the land here, see what's already here, think about what would be a cool idea, maybe not. And we'll do the same survey again. The one you took at the beginning, you're going to take it again, and I'm going to put them both in graphs and see if anything changed. And that's it. It's okay.
And the following section and the following section, so like 3 Sundays, I'm not going to and give you the input. Maybe we could get a guide.
Yeah, we'll meet together. Yeah, we'll meet.
I said maybe we could get a garden out here too.
That's an idea. That's an idea. I have I always have my own little agendas, but this has to feel like a group project. No. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you doing this with us, and yeah, thank you.